we might look at your weaknesses in regards to your ability to complete that program or
Right.
to get that job, or what other training do you need.
Right.
But we focus on strengths.
Right.
And we do that in the adult world. And we have in career development and in mentoring also done that for the youth and the children.
Yes. No, and it's really important that we come together in different systems and use the same framework, same language, so kids don't get inconsistent messages. You know, it's often amazing how I'll be working with kids and I'll hear 2 or 3 people taking the strength-based approach and talking to the kids, and that then I'll have one person come in, yeah, but if you don't change your behavior, this is what's going to happen to you. And it's amazing when you talk to the kid, what they heard was that challenge. Yeah, they didn't pay as much attention to the other, they'll listen to the threat of what. And then kids start to define themselves that way. It's, yeah, and as Michael's talking about, you know, when I train therapists at the university, I find that my first-year therapists are amazing therapists. It's my fourth-year therapists that I have a problem with. Because my first-year therapists are working very hard at just keeping their client in the session. They haven't learned all the different jargons and the strategies and the models to work with. And it's that first-year student that says, you know something, I know I've got to keep them in the room. And so they work a lot on the socializing and bantering and that kind of concept. But by the time we get to a certain point, we've learned to talk a certain way, we're looking for certain things, and we're strategizing, and it may not be a connection to the client whatsoever. If you ever want to read a good book in that area, I think it's profound on all levels, but Scott Miller, The Heroic Client. Barry Duncan is his colleague that does some work too. And they've written a book called What's Right About You, and that's a good book to read just from your own personal paradigm shift. So those are 2 resources to kind of fall upon. But on our second point here, what we focus on becomes a youth reality. If you focus on what's wrong, kids will start seeing themselves from that perspective. If you focus on what they can do, what's possible, what is the strength behind. So take a look at Larry Brentro's work about the whole idea is that if you're only focusing on behavior, you're missing the boat. If you're focusing on how kids feel, which then determines their thinking, which then gets expressed in their behavior, you'll find the path to change. But that's that art of listening, and we've lost that in our society. We're so concerned about outputs, outcomes, and behavior that we've lost the art of actually having a conversation. We're walking down the streets and you say hi to somebody, you have no expectation that person's going to stop and tell you how they're doing, right? It's just some political, you know, sort of polite protocol that we go through. And I spent a lot of time working with the Mushwa Innu out in Labrador. And one of the elders sat down with me once, and as I was starting to sort of get integrated as a friend to that community, he said to me, Wayne, God created you with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. What do you think he was telling you? You talk too much, Wayne. And in our professions, we're sort of trained to talk. We're sort of the experts of the knowledge, right? And we're dispensing the knowledge. Really good mentoring is the art of listening. It's in those moments of silence when kids feel safe that they'll actually tell you what's going on in their lives. It's not that probing and trying to drag it out. It's that how do you connect in ways where you're listening to the nonverbal language, that you're affirming kids. You're looking for opportunities to affirm. And, you know, even with my 2 boys, I do 2 things. I make sure that I compliment them at least 2 to 3 times a day. Even if they've had a bad day, I can still find things that I will affirm them with. And I also invite them into making mistakes. I want them to make mistakes because I think that we're creating a whole generation of youth that are not prepared to take on some of the life challenges that they're going to have to face. We have this idea that good mentoring or good parenting or whatever it is about stress-free kids. Wrong. Life is about stress, but it's not about bad life. It's about learning from things. It's about being challenged to go beyond yourself. It's about looking into yourself and saying, you know, I made a mistake, but that's okay. That doesn't define who I am unless we label them when they make a mistake, right? Making mistakes is an opportunity to learn. You've just eliminated one choice of many options you should be exploring. And that's that idea of creative thinking, generative thinking, critical thinking. Those are the processes we want to invite kids into. And mentoring is a perfect example of where you can create that. Because once you've established trust, respect, and safety, those kids will embrace those concepts and play with them. If they have an expectation that you want them to act a certain way and behave a certain way, you've just eliminated all the options for creative thinking, generative thinking, critical thinking. The language you use, and this is pretty, right? If you use a deficit language, it's amazing how when I work with kids, and I'll actually hear them starting to list off symptoms of the DSM categories. Oh, this is what I'm feeling like today. And I said, you didn't get that language from anybody other than the social worker or the clinical therapist you're working with. You know, I mean, I go through DSM, and I'm about 4 symptoms short of about 6 categories. You know, we all have these feelings. Guess what? This is normalcy, my friend. You do get depressed sometimes. You feel like giving up sometimes. That doesn't mean you're clinically depressed. And, you know, and I was at a conference a little while ago, and this person on the front was actually talking about DSM categories for kids in grades 3 of anxiety disorders and depression disorders. And I'm saying, wait a minute, this kid's just going through life here. He needs somebody to come alongside, or she does, that says, hey, you know, I know that feels tough. I know you're feeling anxious about that. But guess what? That's okay. I'm going to step with you and walk with you a little bit here, and we're going to get through this. And guess what? When you learn how to get through this with me, you're going to be able to do it on your own. Seligman talks in his book, The Optimistic Child, that the greatest curse we have in our society today is that kids feel hopeless. They're not optimistic about the future. And we need to change that. Mentoring is the opportunity to do that. It's about getting into kids' lives in a way where they feel like, hey, I am an amazing kid. I am of value. I do contribute things to life. And guess what? I've learned how to do it, and I know how to do it now better and more influential in the future. I believe that change is inevitable. There's no such thing as a child or youth that can't change. It just depends what kind of invitations they're being offered, what type of relationships are around that. And if it's an invitation about building on their potential, it's amazing how kids rise to that. Positive change always occurs in the context of authentic relationships, and I made reference to this. I don't think that change occurs because somebody threatens kids or says you should be this way in order to be accepted in society. This idea that changing behavior and then we'll accept you is not a functional model. And if we have that, we set kids up for failures all the time. Matter of fact, I think you invite kids to bring their strengths and express it to you in negative ways, because they will learn to push you back. They will learn to push your buttons because you have not accepted them. When kids don't feel accepted, they feel threatened by those relationships around them. And so if you want to move away from that, then we have to move to this idea of that change occurs when kids start feeling successful. They start feeling, and so you need to find what's going on behind the behavior. So a friend of mine runs a security firm in Vancouver. He has a hiring program, but he only hires kids who have a history of breaking into homes. And if you have more homes you've broken into, he's looking more for you, because he doesn't like the kids who have done it once or twice, because that's kind of a haphazard. They may not be committed. It's not as purposeful. They probably got caught, so they're not as good at it. He wants the kids who have a good history in it. And so he actually brings them out onto his job sites when he's talking to people about buying a security system for the home. And the person will be hesitant. He says, well, let my colleague here show you how they will break into your house in the next 5 minutes and rob you. And he has a very successful business going. But he also goes along with these young lads and says, you know, I value you. I value your strength. You're just expressing it in a negative way. So let's create some other options for you. And I'm going to set up a wage for you. I'm going to set up a benefits program for you. I'm going to teach you how to handle your money. I'm going to make sure you move towards independent living. What he's done, he says, I'm going to have a relationship with you whether you like it or not. I value you. And many of these kids don't even know how to accept that invitation, because nobody's come alongside and said, you know something? It's not about what you do, it's who you are. And that's what I'm going to engage with, because if I value you, then you will express that in different ways. So a youth's perspective of reality is primary. If you don't get their story, you're going to have a tough time connecting to what may be important or what may be the path to start moving down. Because it's our view of life or our story that is the lens that we interpret everything around us. How we see people, how we see ourselves, what we see as positive in our lives. And that's so important. If you don't get their view or their lens, then how can you connect and move to the next steps? And that's so important. Youth enter the change when they are invited to start with what's right with them. And again, you know that conversation I had with my wife? I learned the first time I need to talk in a positive way. Because that's a good starting point for the rest of my day. And, you know, even with my own two boys, you know, sitting at breakfast, it's about, okay, guys, you know, what's going to be great about your day? Or it's, you know, my one son came home with his spelling test, you know, and he got 6 out of 10. And, you know, I worked with him on that, and he should have gotten 10 out of 10. So my expectation or my lens was, we worked hard on this. Really what I was saying, I worked hard on it. He didn't, because he didn't see it as so important. So he goes to school and gets 6 out of 10, comes home, and my first reaction was, why didn't you do better? You wasted my time. Those were the thoughts inside concept. But then I asked him, I said, so what do you think happened here, son? He said, well, I'm just giving my teacher room for improvement. His lens was, I'm not sure why you think getting 10 out of 10 is so important, Dad. 6 out of 10 was pretty good. I was there. I participated in the task. And it's interesting how, you know, I'm saying, so, son, could we look at moving that to 8 and maybe narrowing down how what kind of work your teacher needs to do to support you? You know, it was interesting how we could move that conversation in a different way. But, you know, the lens, there's 2 lenses going on there, right? My lens and his lens. Which one's more important? His. And it's not about judging it as right or wrong. It's just about shifting that lens in a different direction. And social capacity building is a process. With many of you, you're going to have different types of influence with kids. But if you're expecting them to go from 1 to 10 in a short period of time, you might as well close up shop and walk out, because this is a lifelong journey. You're planting seeds in small ways for different kids that is going to take them down a path where they're going to start experiencing things. They're going to start contextualizing these ideas and beliefs in themselves through their developmental stages towards adulthood. And as they enter into adulthood, and I'll talk to you a little bit after the break about this idea, is that really I believe that true mentoring with kids is about developing their core competencies or their character. Because that is the template that's going to make them a good parent, a good worker, a good community citizen, somebody who will actually value mentoring and actually be part of that process as they go forward in life. We know that kids who do not enter into some type of voluntary experience or learning the art of giving back to people by age 12, less than 5% of those kids will do volunteerism as an adult. So how you enter into that mentoring relationship now with kids is going to determine whether they're actually going to replicate what you're doing as they move into their adult years.
Wayne? I know you're thinking we should take a break. I want to throw out a challenge to folks. I was going to say I want to help you make this talk relevant, but that doesn't